In the Studio Turf template, if you click this top layer to show this that says optimal camera settings, this is going to give you some settings to help you best match your photograph perspective to match the template design. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, but if you just get these settings generally close, it'll help you match best. Now, this is something I'm planning to do with the new CGI renderings that I'm doing. And I'm basically just giving you the render parameters for what I used in the 3D rendering software, which is going to be equivalent to a camera. Now, on this template, depending on if you're full frame or crop sensor, that's 40 millimeters full frame or 27 millimeters crop sensor, actually 26.667, which I rounded up. But that's going to give you the same perspective full frame or crop sensor with these two focal lengths. Now the camera height, 1.7 feet above the ground, which is pretty low, but I really wanted to represent the making the athlete look large by shooting low and looking up at them a little bit, and that's with the 10% upwards angle on the camera. Now, if we take a look in the 3D rendering software, I'm just getting those settings based on the camera settings in the software here. And this box outline here, this is the edge of the camera frame as I rendered it. And we're looking at right around 1.69, so it's 1.7 feet. I rounded it, 40 millimeters, but that's with a full frame sensor. So if we change this sensor to a crop sensor here, which is a 24 millimeter sensor, you see what happens is that crops in on the image. This mimics exactly how a camera works, but to get the same perspective, if we change the focal length to 26.67 and the sensor to a crop sensor, that's going to give the same exact field of view as with a 40 millimeter sensor on a full, or 40 millimeter focal length on a full frame, which is 36 millimeter sensor. Now, the angle here is 100 degrees, that's 10 degrees looking upwards, 90 degrees is actually looking straight across. And so this is important because it just gives that perspective. Now, if I change this, for instance, to 3 feet above the ground on the camera with the camera looking straight across, a couple of things happen. You lose that slight angle perspective, but then look at this floor here, how much taller this floor is vertically in the camera. From the back to the front, you're taking up, I don't know, maybe 20% of the frame here. And if I'm going to really exaggerate this and lower the camera height to 1 feet. And then you can see as we lower the camera height, you really start compressing that ground, so you're not taking up very much height in the frame. So that's an important concept to know, and I'm going to explain why here in a minute. In Photoshop, let me undo this here, get us back to as it was shot. Now, if we go back to Photoshop here and we look at this image that I have in here, now the height difference on from the back to the front of this floor is pretty important because this is a pretty small area we're putting the person into. And if you have this angle where the front foot is in front of the back foot, what's going to happen is the higher you put your camera. Now, this is an image I shot, I think like 12 years ago, and I'm pretty sure the camera was about waist high, so probably about 2.5 feet high, roughly, which is higher than the perspective of this template. And I can see that looking at that, the perspective is a little bit different. But where this is important is the higher you put your camera, similar to how we saw in the 3D software, as the floor height changed, it also changes the height of the back foot compared to the front foot. So let me demonstrate here. This might make a little more sense if I scale this. Disable here. So the lower you get your camera to the ground, the more it's going to bring the front foot and the back feet vertically closer together. And the higher you put your camera, the more it's going to offset vertically your front foot and back foot. So if you're shooting your camera at, like, say 3 feet high, and you are positioning the player with one back foot behind the front foot, it's really going to change the height difference, and you're going to have a hard time fitting that onto the template. Whereas if you put the camera lower to the ground, the height difference between the front and the back foot becomes closer together just because of the angle of the ground. So then that's going to give them more room on the template. So you do have some room to vary. Like I say, with this image, I shot this probably about 2.5 feet high in the camera, so I'm actually higher than the recommended settings of 1.7. But that's about the extent you can really get away with it if you're going to angle the person and you're going to keep the feet onto this turf. And here's another image from a user they sent me. Now, this image was not shot specifically for this template. They shot this long before I made the template. However, the same thing here, whereas the way the athlete is angled, where the back foot is behind the front foot, and I'm guessing that this was probably similar camera height, about 2.5 feet. So that's about the extent that you'll get away with. I think is about probably 2.5 feet if you're going to angle the person and wanting to keep both feet on this ground. And that's just because, like I say, the way I angled this at 1.7 feet, it gives less vertical space. And if I had have angled the rendering higher, then yes, there would be more vertical space to work with, but it doesn't have the look and feel that I wanted for this design. Because I always think it's a little bit better to be looking up at the athlete anyway. And 1.7 feet is probably lower than some of you are shooting, but I think if you try that out, you'll really match the perspective of this design, as well as I think you might find that it will give a nice perspective of the athlete overall. So anyway, just something to keep in mind. Don't feel you have to get a ruler out and measure this exactly, but just keep that in mind. Get lower when you're shooting for this template. And in the future, for all of my other 3D rendered templates, I am going to plan to come into these camera settings and give you the exact settings that I rendered these designs out so you can match those with your camera. So hope that helps. Thanks for watching.